In this tutorial, we're going to cover Adobe Illustrator Classroom Notebook Chapter 5, which is all about transforming artwork. We're going to be working on creating this infographic from a bunch of the pieces that they're going to give us. So let's go ahead and do a File Open, go to where you've saved, and let's grab that L5 Start. And before we get started, let's do a File, Save As, put it in your folder where you have your lessons for 5, and instead of L5 Start, let's change it to L5 Infographic. And push save. Alright, so you'll get the prompt to go ahead and say OK. And you're going to be doing quite a bit with playing with the artboards in the first part of this lesson, just kind of get an idea of how different kinds of artboards work. So let's go ahead and do our view, fit artboard in window. And you see obviously that takes us to our active artboard. So let's go ahead and take a view, fit all in window. We should be able to see everything. There we go. Let's do a view, fit all in window. Oh, we have that one active, that's why. Alright, I'm going to do a Control minus, zoom out a little bit. So let's go ahead and create a couple of extra artboards. In order to do this, let's go over here to the right hand side where we have document setup. And from there we want edit artboards. That's a little bit different than your book because it's buried the edit artboards now. So now with edit artboards, we can go ahead and create some new artboards. So to the right, let's go ahead and drag a new artboard out that's about 800 by 800. And you can see by looking at the measurements on your W and H about how big you're making it. If you don't get it perfect, that's fine. You can go over here to your properties and change it over here to 800 by, and let's go ahead and make it 850, make it a little bit taller. Now you're also going to notice that in this properties panel we have the ability to change the name of the artboard. So instead of Artboard 2, let's go ahead and call it Back. And enter. So now you see we've got Back as one of our options. So what else can we do? We can go ahead and we can duplicate that artboard, or we can make a new artboard. So since we're in the Artboard tool, let's go ahead and go to the properties panel. Right here it says Artboard. We get the post-it note. Let's go ahead and hit New Artboard. And it's going to give us another new artboard. Let's go ahead and call that one Front. And hit Enter. So now you'll see we've got 3 different artboards. I'm going to view, fit all in window, and I can see I've got all these bits and pieces laying around. If I wanted to, I could use these presets under Artboards, and it gives me all kinds of different sizes of screens that are already created, so you can create for mock-ups for those individual items. We're not going to play with that right now, I just want to let you know it's there. Alright, so let's go ahead and click on our original artboard. And we can tell that this is our active artboard, which is our selection tool, because it gets kind of a darker line around it. And we want to go ahead and fit this artboard and make it the same size. Let's go to our Artboard tool. I'm going to grab that transform and drag it up so it's equal to the size of my art, and hit enter and OK. Alright, so what are some other things we can do with the artboards while we're here? We can go ahead and we can align them. So we can go ahead and grab our Artboard tool. Click one, I'm going to shift, I'm going to click, I'm going to click. If you try to drag select, you'll end up making another artboard, which is not what you want to do. In your properties over here, you're going to notice you get some align options. So I'm going to go ahead and align vertical centers, and you notice how now it aligns those for me. Really nice. So I don't have to worry about having it all up and down and perfect the way I might want to work on it. Alright, so what are some other things we do? Let's go ahead and look at our window and come down here to Artboards. And you'll see we get a pop-up here. We can actually take and drag those layers around and rename the way that these are appearing. So you can also double click on it, and as a way to navigate between the different artboards, you can also use your navigator down here as a way to flip between the different artboards. So just want to let you know, there's a lot of different ways you can get through all these different individual elements. So another thing we can do, I'm going to go ahead and close that, zoom out. with our artboards is we can take a look at rulers and guides. So with your selection tool, make sure nothing is selected. Go over here to rulers and guides, and you can actually right here click to show rulers. So you can actually see right now that we're measuring in pixels. It says so right here. We can go ahead and change that unit to inches if we want. You can take and drag just as you would in another program. You can drag a guide down. You can make it just specific for individual artboards, totally up to you. What's nice about Illustrator is it does let you hide and show guides really easily, or lock and unlock the guides just within that properties panel, so there's nothing actually hidden. So that's always a nice thing to have, is having those guides. You can also play with those rulers of origin. Pay attention to how the 0 point is. So if I'm on this artboard, notice how 0 is now at the corner of this artboard. If I change to my new artboard, do a space and come over, my 0 is going to reset for that artboard. So it's going to measure per artboard depending on what is active at the time. You can change that. Don't really need to a whole lot, but the book does go into it if that's something you're interested in. Alright, I'm going to do a control minus, and let's play with what we've got here down this windy conditions. I'm going to grab my selection tool. Right now it's got a bounding box on it, which means I can take and grab those corners and reshape and reshape it any way I want. Clearly, if I hold Shift, I would be able to do that proportionally, but I don't want to change it at all. I just want to drag it without accidentally changing it. So how do I do that? I can actually go to View and go to Hide Bounding Box. It's about halfway through, and if I do that, I can't grab these corners anymore and reshape it. So it makes it so that you cannot play with, you cannot turn those into a transform tool, so it's kind of a nice way to go. You can always nudge that over with your arrow keys a little bit and move it on to that one. Alright, let's go ahead and do a view and just put our bounding box back on. Let's scroll over and let's activate this artboard here, the artboard that we have now known as, you can tell which one you're on, front. So we're going to grab this blue. I can have some really precise alignment. Instead of me dragging it up here with the blue selected, I can say I want X to be 0, I want Y to be 0, enter, and it should have brought it right up here, and for some reason I did not have it activated correctly. So if you do it correctly, it should pop straight onto those two sections. So that's if you want to do really precise placement of different items. Not something we're going to use a whole lot, but just wanted to let you know that those features are there. Alright, let's go ahead and play with scaling some items. So I'm going to do a Control Plus and scroll down, grab my hand and my space bar. Let's take a look at our gentleman here who is the kind of the raincoat dude. So how can we scale that object? Well, we have a couple different ways to do it. We know obviously we can use our transform and drag and do it that way, but there's some other ways we can do it as well. So let's go ahead and look at our different options. Let's go ahead and do it from our transform. Make sure you're viewing it from your center point. We want to make sure that our constrain is on, so the links are on. And we want to change this to 30 and % and hit enter. Now, you notice something happens here. All of a sudden he's got these gigantic arms. That's because we did not have it set to scale strokes, because truly these are just lines. So let's do a Control Z to undo. Let's go into our transform and make sure we hit the scale strokes and effects with it. Then we can go ahead and scale it with the 30%, and it'll work out just fine. Alright, so now we scaled it with his arms. So if you find that something's not scaling appropriately, that is why. Alright, so what's some other things we do? Let's go ahead and scroll over a little bit. And let's go to our flower. And look at this big old flower that we have here. There's a few different ways we can scale it as well. We could do the 30%, or we could try something else. We can go ahead and try our scale tool. If you can't see it, your scale tool is right under your eraser. It looks like two artboards with an eraser with a arrow on it. And it will let us do a few different things. So let's go ahead and double click it. And we want to make sure your preview is on. We want to make sure you're scaling the strokes and effects. We want to do it uniformly. So we want to change it by 20%. And we'll say OK. So now we've brought that down and made it much, much smaller. So let's do a Control minus, zoom out a little bit. And let's go ahead and move our, grab our selection, hit that top artboard. And let's do a view artboard and window. So we can see we're going to move it up to this one. Let's grab our selection tool, grab our flower, and scroll up. And you can kind of go up a little bit. And we want to put some flowers up here in our infographic. So I have one flower here. I can make a copy if I hit Alt, kind of bring it over, hit Alt, do a couple more. So totally up to you as to how you're going to or where you're going to put the flowers in. So we've got a couple of flowers. Clearly they are ginormous flowers compared to the size of our windmill, but that's okay. All right, so what are some other things we can do? Let's scroll down a little bit more. So we've got kind of this wind shape. So I'm going to do Control plus. And we want to go ahead and make this more of a wind shape. So there's a couple things we want to do. Let's do Edit and Copy. Edit, let's do Paste in Place. And let's grab right here on the Properties panel. And we want to flip along vertical axis. And it's going to give us an extra. And go ahead and pull it down. So we're creating one single shape. Kind of nudge it depending on how you want it to align on each other. It's got kind of a gradient going on. And I'm going to grab my selection tool. And I'm just going to drag and make that one wind a little bit bigger. So we're making that illusion of wind. I can then go ahead with my selection tool, draw a box around it, and let's group it. I'm going to do some Control minus, zoom out. And let's go ahead and drag this guy up into our infographic. And I could use my space bar. Let's go ahead and grab it and maybe put some wind here. I'm going to hit Alt, let's grab another one, put some more wind in so we can kind of see where our wind is going to be. So you can do that by using those reflect and flip along axis options. The book also goes into how to use the reflect tool to do that. So let's go ahead and play with how to rotate some objects. So we need to go down here to our little fisherman dude, and we need to rotate him. So there's a couple ways to do that. We can grab and do it with our traditional rotate and pull it sideways. If you hold shift, it's going to bounce 45 degrees each time. So that's one way to do it. Another thing you can do is grab your rotate tool, and then you can select a reference point, and you can rotate him that way as well. So you're going to select from the middle. And let's go ahead and rotate him. So you could rotate him around a certain point. Totally up to you. Just need to make sure he ends up kind of sideways in the end. Alright, so let's go ahead and scroll over and look at our windmill blades over here. So I'm going to hit my space bar. Just kind of scroll up. Grab my selection tool. I'm going to grab my group here, which is the windmill blade. And we want to do a few transformations on this one. So one of the first things we want to do is grab rotate. And I want to tell it where I want to rotate from. So I want to rotate from the bottom of that point. So you kind of see I get that rotate. From here, I'm going to go ahead and drag. See it's starting to drag. I'm going to hit Alt and Shift at the same time and drag down. By hitting Alt, it's making a copy. By hitting Shift, it's making it so it goes in 45-degree increments. I'm going to let go of my mouse and my keys. And so now I've got those two items at exactly a 45-degree or 90-degree angle, which is what I want. So I need two more of those. I could do the same process, or I can go Object and Transform again. Object, Transform again, and now I have all four blades. So let the software do the work for you. I'm going to grab the selection tool, highlight my blades, and I'm going to make sure I group those. I'm going to double click on my rotate tool and a preview, and I want to rotate all of that 45 degrees. So instead of takes a lot of the guesswork out and makes it a lot easier. I'm going to do a Control minus, zoom out, grab my selection tool, and I'm going to move my blades up here onto my windmill. I'm going to do a Control S and save, make sure I'm not losing anything that I've got so far. So far we played with that. Now we want to distort a few objects. So let's go ahead and scroll in and grab that artboard. Let's do a view, fit artboard and window so we get this main window. Let's go ahead and play with our flowers. We're going to go ahead and double click our flower group, which is going to take us into isolation mode. If I just click on the yellow part of the flower, I will only affect that one part of the flower. I want to go over here to my properties panel and get that FX. I want to get the effect. I'm going to come down here to transform, distort and transform, and I want pucker and bloat. Make sure you turn preview on. And you can see as you drag this slider, you can change just the shape and size of that one flower. So about 35 will give you some nice round flowers. When you're done with it, say OK and say escape when you're done with it. So say you want to come in and do this other one. Double click, go into isolation mode, click on the part you want to change, the FX. Let's come down to distort and transform, pucker, bloat, preview, and I'm going to make this one kind of a square one and say OK. So go ahead and play with your different flowers until you're happy with it. I can do just the center as well. I could make that have a different look and feel. So let's go ahead and make it really fat and squishy. Alright, so I've kind of made that different look and feel. So instead of having to create those individual items, you can use something as simple as a circle and let the software do the work for you. I'm going to hit escape to get out of that isolation mode and stop playing with those. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at our flags we have over here as days per year. They're kind of, you know, standard. They look a little graphy, but we want them to be a little more fun. Let's go ahead and select one. Come over here to hit FX. Come down to distort, and let's do twist. And let's do preview, and let's twist it 20 degrees so now you kind of see we get that wave. Now I want to have that same effect on all these other flags. If I click the first one, hit shift, and click my other so I select all of them, it will select them all at once, which is pretty awesome. So we want to go ahead and let's do distort, twist, preview, 20%, and they did them all at once. So you can change multiple items at one time. And notice how your twist is based on how long that piece of the banner was to begin with. Alright, so now we're going to play with this signpost over here. If we look at the original, zoom in a little bit, we see it's got kind of some perspective to it and it looks a little bit different. So let's go ahead and figure out how do we create that. We have to do a couple different effects in order to create that type of effect. So one of the things we want to do is play with free transform. Free transform is under your puppet warp, which looks like a tack. So I want to grab my selection tool and I want to make sure that I have selected this east-west one first. Because what I want to do is play with making the tail of this a little bit wider. So in order to do that, I'm going to switch to my free transform. I'm going to get a second toolbar that comes up. I want the third tool down, which is perspective distort. And I just want to make the end just a little bit wider. Go ahead and grab my selection tool again, grab north south, come back here to free distort, and let's make the end of north a little bit bigger. Alright, so now I've got both of those. So I click out, hit my selection tool, nothing selected. It's not quite right yet, and that's okay. Let's go ahead and play with shearing the object, which means we need to actually move it so it's going to look like it is pointing a different way. So let's go ahead and choose north-south first, And let's grab the shear tool, which is under scale. So scale's here. We want shear. And we're going to go ahead and pull. And you can see how you can pull and change the way that that is going to be looking. So I'm going to do undo. Let's do shear. And let's go ahead and move north-south to about -20. So you see how my numbers are kind of changing. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, I'm going for about there. All right, then I'm going to grab my selection tool, grab my east-west, I'm going to grab my shear, and let's take it to about -160. And you can see you can kind of tilt it back and forth. So you've got some room to play in there. It's not an exact science. All right, so we're getting close. Let's go ahead and grab our selection tool and line up our sign now on the signpost. So we want to go here and we want to go here. So you kind of, you're using the color change as the indicator as to where you're going to be putting those individual items. All right, but now you see we're not getting that effect we want right here with the north. It looks a little bit weird. So we're going to select north-south. We're going to hit ungroup. We're going to come back. We're going to select just the north of that north-south part. We want to come to Object and Arrange and bring to front. And notice now we now have that look that this is in front and creates that 3D feel that we're looking for. All right, let's go ahead and grab those percentages and adjust them according to where those individual elements ended up. Maybe move my flower out of the way. It's kind of in the wrong place now. We'll make one over here. So totally up to you as to what you're going to do with the flowers. So now we have created that sign, which is a much nicer effect, much more fun to look at. So the last thing we're going to play with is adding this guy into the infographic. And right now we notice we've got a really straight gentleman. So let's grab our gentleman, grab him up here, bring him up to your flagpole. I'm going to do a Control+ so I can zoom in a whole bunch. We're going to play with the puppet warp in order to make this work. You've got to make sure that you've got your selection on the gentleman first. Then we want to go ahead and come into where you had free transform, grab puppet warp, and it's going to put these automatic pins in. So they're like points which you, like a marionette, which you could bend off. Think of as elbows. You can look at show mesh. It'll show you all those individual pieces as to how it's going to work. I like turning it off because it's a little bit much. So what I'm going to do is with my puppet warp, I'm going to grab this tack that's holding his hand in. And if I just grab his hand, I get kind of, a little bit too much going on. I want to change that. So before I do that, let's go ahead and add another pin as to where his elbow would be. So right now, if you look at my tack, it's got a plus sign, which allows me to add a pin right there. So it will use that as the end rotate point. So now I can grab this tack and see it's rotating off of that one point instead of turning his body into kind of a weird shape. So I can also grab make another elbow, move his hands up a little bit. So now I want to move his feet. So I can add a tack here, and I can grab and just move his feet, which may be not quite what I want to do. So I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to hit another one, make it kind of some knees. If I hit shift click, I can change both of those at once, which I don't necessarily want to do. So I want to make sure I have my active pin. So I just stretch his feet up so he looks like he's kind of flying in the air. So you can do a lot of really fun stuff with the puppet warp. So let's go ahead and take a look at Control-, to a view, fit spread in window, or fit all in window, and you'll see we've got our beautiful infographic with a lot of different ways you can transform and play with different elements in Illustrator to create an infographic that's not flat, that's something visually interesting and something you can be proud of.